Brazos Valley animal shelters need your help as they become overcrowded with animals being abandoned. What you can do to help out. And the CDC is issuing a new warning about a respiratory virus that may be going unnoticed or misdiagnosed. How that affects us in the Brazos Valley coming up. Your Krhd News starts right now.
Connecting the Brazos Valley. This is KRHD News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Hallie Jones. Animal shelters across Texas and even the Brazos Valley are reaching capacity limits once again. KRHD News reporter Rachel Espayat finds out what's behind the surge in shelter populations.
Kennel by kennel, you'll see eager dogs at Aggieland Humane Society hoping to find a forever home.
We're back to normal this year. We are seeing weeks where we're seeing over 25, 30 pets come in as stray.
Last year's stay-at-home order provided relief to Aggieland Humane Society and other animal rescues as more people adopted their four-legged friends. But this summer, local rescues and shelters are quickly filling up. At one point, Brenham Animal Services approached capacity with nearly 100 pets.
We were very close up until last weekend when we had our adoption event.
Many of our local shelters, if strays come in, they have to accept them. They have to either make room or make some really difficult decisions. With local animal rescues, we have the luxury of being able to say, I'm sorry, we're full. We can't help you.
When local rescues start to get overcrowded, Long Way Home Adoptables steps in to help.
If the shelters get at capacity, they have to start making really difficult decisions, and we don't want our local shelters to have to do that.
Brenham Animal Services also added a home-to-home program to help bring home a pet without bringing it into the shelter to make sure they don't get to that point.
Aggieland Humane Society has reduced their adoption fees to only $10, hoping more people will add a furry friend to the family. You can also help by fostering a pet. In Bryan, Rachel Espayat, KRHD News.
If you're interested in adopting a pet this summer, the Aggieland Humane Society has a deal for you. They're reducing their adoption fees to only $10 for the rest of the summer. Aggieland Humane Society is open Monday through Friday from noon until 5 p.m., then Saturday from noon to 3 p.m. They're also accepting volunteers and fosters. If you want to visit the Aggieland Humane Society, they're located at 5359 Leonard Road in Bryan. Due to overcrowding, some shelters are forced to euthanize animals, and it's a real issue here in the Lone Star State. According to a 2019 report by Best Friends Animal Society, Texas ranks second in the country for highest euthanasia rate. In 2018, Texas had the highest rate in the nation. In 2019, over 96,000 pets were killed in Texas shelters, a 15% reduction from 2018. Nationwide, the number of pets killed in shelters dropped from 733,000 in 2018 to 625,000 in 2019. Meanwhile, doggy daycares are starting to see an influx in new animals. Rover.com reports that nearly half of Americans got a new dog during the pandemic. Now that people are starting to get back into the office, places like Dogtopia and Frisco are seeing a boom in dogs joining their daycares. They say they're seeing around 40 new dogs every week. In other news, a Texas A&M entomologist is entering the fight against ticks. Her research is taking aim at preventing negative economic and health impacts caused by tick-borne disease. Every year, over 475,000 Americans are affected by Lyme disease, the most common tick-borne disease. And cattle tick bites can cause cattle to suffer from Texas cattle fever and bovine babesiosis. And as tick-borne disease cases continue to climb each year since 2004, Dr. Adela Chavez and her team are now taking a closer look at tick bites sites in the hopes of finding a breakthrough.
We're focusing on the bite side. What we're trying to do is describe in detail and define what are the immune responses that are occurring at the bite side so that we can then tailor treatments and vaccines so that we can stop tick feeding and pathogen transmission.
Symptoms of Lyme disease include body fatigue, flu-like symptoms, and a rash often in the shape of a bullseye. New at 5, 2 men are in jail tonight facing multiple charges, including possession of a controlled substance and unlawfully carrying of a weapon. According to Grimes County Sheriff's Office, Davion Jones is facing a misdemeanor charge for possession of marijuana, 2 first-degree felony charges for manufacture or delivery of a controlled substance, and 1 misdemeanor of unlawfully carrying a weapon. His total bond amount is $57,000. John McNeil is also facing 2 felony charges of manufacture or delivery of a controlled substance, a misdemeanor charge of evading arrest, and a felony charge of unlawful possession of a firearm by a felon. His bond total is set at $40,000. Tonight, a car thief is in custody after leading Houston police on a 125-mile pursuit. The driver is accused of stealing a Nissan Versa from a rental car company several days ago. Police stopped the car at a hotel parking lot near I-10. During an attempt to stop the driver, the man fled on Highway 6 at speeds over 100 miles per hour. The chase spanned 5 counties, eventually ending in Polk County in deep East Texas. Police say they also found an assortment of drugs in the vehicle. A respiratory virus that commonly affects young children in the U.S. saw a significant dip during the height of the pandemic, but now cases are back on the rise. KRHD reporter Rebecca Fiedler talks to health experts about the recent increase of cases.
The CDC issued a public health advisory last month urging clinicians to test patients for interseasonal respiratory syncytial virus, more commonly known as RSV. RSV typically affects younger children and elderly adults during the winter time, but there has been an increase in cases in the southern United States during this summer. According to the CDC, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, RSV cases were lower than average for a winter cold and flu season. On average, 58,000 young children and 177,000 elderly adults are hospitalized with RSV each year. The CDC notes that because toddlers and infants weren't exposed to RSV during the pandemic, they may actually now be at an increased risk of more severe illnesses associated with RSV.
During its typical season during the winter, everyone was wearing a mask. Sick people were staying at home and socially distancing. And most respiratory illnesses were kind of minimized throughout the winter season. Now that, everyone is taking the masks off and kind of going back to pre-pandemic behaviors, we're starting to see this surge in RSV cases.
Texas A&M's Dr. Jason McKnight noted that a majority of children will catch RSV at some point in their lives and survive the disease without serious damage. Still, he points out that it's important for parents to be vigilant in monitoring a child's symptoms for severity and to physically distance a child from other people if they become sick. Reporting from the Brazos Valley, Rebecca Fiedler, KRHD News.
There have been predictions about a likely increase in cases of what's considered prolonged grief linked to this pandemic. And the founder of the Center for Complicated Grief tells us that we're getting some early indications that this may already be happening. There's a small study from China which showed about 30% of prolonged grief disorder due to the pandemic. Another indication is the number of people who have just been talking about the grief they're feeling on social media. Dr. Kathy Shear tells us all of this may still be considered early grief. It's considered prolonged after 6 months and more.
It's just typical grief that just isn't, it isn't kind of finding a place in a person's life. So we say grief emerges naturally and finds a place in our life, and it's not doing that.
Now, she says that past studies have shown that any kind of sudden, unexpected death puts people at an increased risk for prolonged grief. Jennifer Ritz-Sullivan has been struggling with the grief of her mom's death from COVID more than 7 months later. She says that her mom, Erla Dawn Demetriadis, contracted COVID from a family member who was not wearing a mask. She spent the last 2 weeks of her life in the hospital and she died alone. Jennifer was able to talk to her mom briefly on the phone the day before she died.
It is knowing that my mom suffered and died by herself. I very much wish to believe that she felt our love, but nobody should have to die that way alone. So that for me is the hardest part.
Now, she, along with Marked by COVID, are pushing for a resolution introduced in Congress for a National Memorial Day. Now, she believes that this recognition would help with the grief that so many people are feeling right now, and she's been receiving support through groups like Marked by COVID and the COVID Grief Network. But she says that there needs to be better access to mental health assistance.
People in the community are strapped financially, emotionally. We're all enduring so much this year, and to not have access to proper mental health care on top of it.
Dr. Scheer sees the need for this as well and says that COVID has exacerbated the problem. She says there are fewer therapists who know how to work with grief and treat prolonged grief disorder.
What you should be looking for is things that are standing in the way of being able to understand and accept the reality of the death, and being able to start to think about your own life moving forward.
You can find a list of therapists who address prolonged grief at complicatedgrief.columbia.edu. Virtual services are available. The cost of the treatment does vary, but should be covered by insurance. Now, still ahead in our lineup, a growing number of investigators have been turning to genealogical databases to help solve cold cases. We'll talk about why more states are looking to stop this. COVID-19 vaccines for children younger than 12 may be approved shortly after the start of the new school year. Story that tops the newsfeed. Results of both Moderna and Pfizer's trials on younger kids should be ready in the fall. The FDA said emergency approval could happen in winter and full approval shortly after. Canada is closer to welcoming travelers again. The Prime Minister said fully vaccinated Americans should be able to come in starting next month, September, for all other countries. Canada has essentially been closed to anyone non-essential since the start of the pandemic. The Eiffel Tower reopened today for the first time in 9 months. It was shut down again last fall during a second surge of COVID. It opened despite France adding new virus restrictions because of the Delta variant.
And we are looking at partly cloudy skies across the area. Not as much activity across our region today. An isolated shower storm still possible through sunset, however. So keep the umbrella in the back just in case, but not expecting too much. 93 degrees, partly cloudy skies, feeling like 101. Yeah, it is hot. 72 is that dew point, so that's why it's making it feel about 8 degrees warmer. Winds out of the south at 9 miles per hour, so a bit of a breeze out there. But with that humidity, all the recent rains, that's what's causing it to feel so hot, even though air temperatures are down right around 92, 93 degrees. Clouds and radar showing that we do have, again, a few isolated thunderstorms creeping in from time to time. And some of these may come across Bryan College Station, but they won't last long at all. If they happen to get in your neighborhood, it'll pass by just in a few minutes. And it looks like the majority of the rain's been over here into Louisiana, parts of Mississippi, where they have better chances for showers and thunderstorms over the next couple of days. Little system riding through North Texas. That one will be benign for us, as that's not going to bring anything our way, at least initially. As we check out our future track again, showing a few isolated thunderstorms and then partly to mostly cloudy skies by the morning hours. We heat the atmosphere up again, maybe an isolated storm or two, even though that's not showing too much. And then on Sunday, we'll probably do it again as well. And again, just a 20% chance of rain in your area. So tonight, temperatures into the 70s, 75 for Bryan College Station, Hearn, Franklin at 73, and Centerville at 73 degrees. Then tomorrow, highs in the low to mid 90s, but it'll feel like it's close to 100 when you factor in that humidity. So get a cool beverage ready for the weekend, as temperatures will stick around into the 90s. Isolated storm chances, 30% on Monday, 94 degrees. Then scattered thunderstorms Tuesday and Wednesday. Another weak summer front coming in with highs in the upper 80s to near 90. And then it gets hot by the next weekend as well.
Recently, investigators solved what is believed to be the oldest known cold case in the U.S. But the DNA testing that detectives used is now getting restricted. More states are looking to pass laws barring law enforcement from using certain genealogy testing. Dan Grossman takes a look at the implications.
In the open ranges of rural Montana, word tends to travel faster than the wind that whispers through the trees. But for 65 years, investigators with the Cascade County Sheriff's Office,
we're coming up on it right here,
hadn't heard even a whisper about what happened here.
There was blood found right in front of that tree, and Dwayne's body was off to the side about 4 feet.
On January 3rd, 1956, the bodies of 18-year-old Dwayne Bogle and 16-year-old Patty Kalitsky were found face down, miles apart from one another, with bullet wounds to their heads.
They left about 9 o'clock that night and were never seen of or heard from again.
After decades of dead ends, Detective Sergeant John Kadner picked up the case and after naming more than 30 suspects who had known criminal histories, found nothing.
In 2019, I sent a vaginal slide that was taken during Patty's autopsy.
Found nothing until Sergeant Kadner took a sample from preserved evidence and sent it to a lab for testing, which led to a suspect, a man who had died in 2007.
They were able to swab that slide and identify sperm samples, which ultimately led to a DNA sample, which was fed into a genealogical database, and that was able to identify 3 known test takers.
The process, which has become more popular in recent years, is called genetic genealogy and works just how the sergeant explained. Evidence from a case is sent to a lab for testing. Once a DNA sample is identified, investigators take it and put it into a genealogical database, similar to 23andMe or Ancestry.com, which has millions of samples from people trying to trace their family history. Once a match, or in this case, matches come back, investigators treat them as leads and get to work.
Without genealogy testing, do you think you would have been able to solve this cold case?
Absolutely not. No, that's the only way we solve this cold case.
To people like Cascade County Sheriff Jesse Slaughter, the testing bypasses drawbacks like only being able to cross-reference data with known criminals.
You know, I have real concerns about genomic information in the criminal justice system.
But to Professor of Civil Liberties Aaron Murphy, making this information known and available is nothing more than a slippery slope.
It could end up hurting you in the future. Someone could de-identify you in a covert op abroad. You could be used in ways to exclude you from service, etc.
To ensure things like that don't happen, Maryland and Montana have both passed laws restricting its use. In Maryland, a judge will need to sign off on the practice, which can only be used for serious crimes like murder and sex abuse. Same in Montana, where investigators must first get a search warrant. Similar legislation is also being discussed in Utah and Washington state, which have both proposed bills in the last year.
Homicide seems like a very just cause. What do you think the likelihood of not obtaining a search warrant, if it is for the purpose of solving some of these homicide cases, is?
Well, I think it just depends on how much information you have. In this case, I think it would have been, very difficult, to be honest with you, because we hadn't established him as a suspect through other means.
A recent study from scientists in Israel found a genealogical database of around 1.3 million people could identify around 60% of people in the U.S. with European descent, showing just how many matches could come from one DNA sample. And in many cases, people who sign up for these websites might not know their information is being used in criminal investigations.
Legislation of this kind is good for the business interests. You know, if you want to put yourself out there as we're a genomic genealogy company that does crime solving, there's a lane for that, but there's also a lane to say we're a genomic genealogy company that believes in your genomic privacy.
There was never a bullet recovered from the scene.
In this case, the country's oldest known cold case, the suspect's family members were helpful, and Sergeant Kadner says grateful, as the practice of DNA testing led to closure.
Well, I'm someone who would be perfectly content not to do these searches at all.
But people like Aaron pose the question, at what cost?
From a constitutional perspective, I think it's a good decision. From my ambition to solve those crimes and put the people away, it is a little bit of a roadblock.
I'm Dan Grossman.
Here are some of the stories we're working on for Krhd News at 6. Even after legalization, industrial hemp is struggling to take off in Texas. We'll talk to an expert about that. Plus, Texas A&M is rolling out their new fleet of electric buses. But what impact is that having on campus? These stories and more coming up on Krhd News at 6. Well, World News tonight is just ahead, and we're back in 30 minutes for Krhd News at 6. Until then, have a great evening.